In my opinion, there is one thing that the airbrush does better than anything else. It's a technique that is so straightforward that absolutely anybody can use it. Today we're going to use this technique to easily paint the flesh on a mostly flesh-colored miniature. Welcome to Treehane Miniatures. Now of course, an airbrush is a fantastic tool for priming a miniature. However, it would be a little disingenuous of me to use that as a selling point for a painting technique. Using an airbrush to prime miniatures is an invaluable resource and worth the price of admission all on its own, but I don't really consider that a painting technique. The airbrush is also incredibly useful for underpainting light values on a miniature. Known as zenithal highlighting, this technique is used for pre-establishing light values from the deepest shadows to the brightest highlights before a single color is applied to the miniature. It's a very simple technique that begins with a miniature fully primed in black. This is followed by a layer of medium gray that is sprayed from above the miniature at a downward 45-degree angle. Finally, white is sprayed directly from above to create the brightest highlights on the most upward-facing areas. However, this strength doesn't have to be strictly relegated to underpainting light values in a basic grayscale. This approach to applying paint at various angles from above with progressively lighter colors works just as well for vibrant paints that represent the finished colors on the model. It's a great way to preserve shadow colors without requiring washes, and I can easily work my way up to a decently bright highlight color using only the airbrush for a tabletop ready finish. I'll share with you both a miniature with the skin painted entirely using an airbrush, and I'll demonstrate how to take the contrast a step further by finishing up with a standard brush over the airbrush work. For this demonstration, I'm using a miniature that is fully primed black before I apply the darkest shadow color. I'm using a dark purple for this. If I hadn't already primed this miniature black, it would make more sense to simply begin with a dark purple primer. Since I'm spraying the shadow color directly over a black primer, I make sure to hit all of the recesses with a light coat of the dark purple. I then proceed to build up the opacity of the purple shadow color on the more raised surfaces. One advantage of beginning with a pure black base is that I can leave the deepest recesses very dark, thereby increasing the contrast of the finished piece. However, I never leave black primer visible on my miniatures. To me, flat black primer has a weird finish that doesn't look right to me on a completed miniature. Next up, I'm adding some midtone color to this dude's muscles. Yep, I'm going for a very violet hue for this giant fantasy creature's skin. This is one of those unfortunate situations where almost every baddie in this game has the same boring Caucasian skin tone. It's not that Caucasian skin is bad to paint, it's just a missed opportunity. With such a large variety of fantasy creatures in this game, they could have easily mixed the colors up a little bit more. Anyway, as I apply this paint, I'm spraying at a much steeper angle from above the miniature than I did with the dark purple. This approach will brighten the upward-facing attributes while preserving the shadow color below. The larger the muscles or whatever other features I choose to paint, the easier it is to use this technique convincingly. Still, as I demonstrated with the Sand Dweller for Cthulhu Death May Die, this style of painting skin works on even the most waifish of characters. This is as far as I'm going to take the highlights with this particular character. I want to switch to a standard brush for the final brightness. You see, I actually enjoy miniature painting, and I wanted to spend a little more time with this project. Sometimes I feel like I'm rushing through a paint job just to get a video out, and I didn't want to do that with this guy. But fear not, I have a great example of a miniature where I took the highlights all the way up to pure ice yellow with an airbrush. As it stands with this Cliffbreaker Cyclops, this quick and easy application of just 2 flesh tones is enough to get the skin tabletop ready. I personally just want to refine the skin a little bit more. I got this idea for painting skin primarily using an airbrush from a friend who painted his Zombie Hulk for the Marvel Zombies board game using only an airbrush. He was speed painting a bunch of zombie heroes for one of our game sessions and decided to paint the Hulk skin using only an airbrush. I was so impressed with the results when I saw this miniature. Here it is against a black background. All of the shadows that are visible in the cracks and crevices around the Hulk's muscles are a result of the dark underpainting that wasn't affected by the lighter gray color sprayed from above. No washes, no glazes, and no refinement with a standard brush were used to achieve this, and the results are incredible. Of course, I like to make things more difficult for myself, so I press on with a standard brush to see just how complicated I can make this. I find that there is some actual value in slowing down like this though. I truly enjoy miniature painting and I like to spend time engaged in the hobby. By slowing down like this, I shift the focus from completing the project to painting solely for enjoyment. It allows me to immerse myself in the moment rather than focusing on the end result. I'm choosing to jump to a much lighter color to maximize the contrast on this piece. Normally, when layering like this, I will mix intermediate colors to blend between each color layer. In other words, I would usually mix the Coven Purple with the Salmon Rose and use that as one of the layer colors before moving on to Salmon Rose all on its own. But today I'm taking a different approach. Since this is an unproven recipe, one that I haven't tried before, I want to see how these colors work together before committing too much time to each step. If I like how the Salmon Rose looks over the Coven Purple, I will simply use Coven Purple as a glaze to smooth the transition between these two layers. This approach is sometimes referred to as sketching. In this context, sketching refers to abruptly placing colors on the model to get an overall feel for how the colors work together, light placement, etc. Then, once I'm happy with the essence of the color scheme, I work to refine the finished result. The one thing that I focused on most while highlighting the anatomy of this giant is to take the brush stroke to the top of each muscle where it meets the shadow of the muscle above it. To me, this is counterintuitive. It would seem that the portion of the muscle that is closest to the recessed shadow would also be in shadow. It makes sense to me that the part of the muscle that sticks out the furthest should receive the brightest highlights. I've tried this approach before and the results weren't good. The muscles ended up looking like a weirdly colored topographical map. I am digging how the Salmon Rose color is making it look like this dude is exposed to some extremely bright light coming from his right, so I'm going to press on with the Coven Purple glaze as soon as I get all of the roided muscle bellies properly lit. There isn't a whole lot to say about glazing with Coven Purple. I'm glazing with Coven Purple. This is necessary to smooth the harsh color transition between the underlying Coven Purple layer and the Salmon Rose layer. I have this paint heavily thinned with water, so it's very translucent. I'd say the most critical point to glazing is remembering to remove most of the watered down paint from my brush. I absolutely do not want this to behave like a wash. Also, even a slightly overloaded brush can leave a small pool of glaze behind when the brush is lifted at the end of the stroke. This can be frustrating. The easiest way for me to test the consistency of my glaze and how much will come off my brush is to swipe it on my thumbnail. This gives me a good indication of how the paint will perform on the model. As I smooth these color transitions on the model, I begin each stroke a little within the Salmon Rose layer and draw my strokes toward the Coven Purple area. More paint will be deposited at the end of the stroke than at the beginning. If I finished glazing the Coven Purple within the Salmon Rose area, it would maintain a harsh separation between the two colors. For Salmon Rose highlights that are too thin to use this approach effectively, I glaze with a single stroke along the separation of the two colors. This way, I don't completely cover the tiny Salmon Rose highlights that are present on some of the smaller muscles. The final highlight color is ice yellow. I have this thin with water so I can build up the opacity slowly. I apply the paint with little dots and dashes to simulate the most extreme glare of reflected light. I also have this thin to the point where it's very translucent. Unlike the previous layer, this won't require the sketch glaze style of painting. The initial coat of ice yellow allows much of the Salmon Rose to show through. Then I apply additional coats of ice yellow to smaller and smaller areas until I adequately build up the brightness without the need for any further refinement. When looking at this piece as a whole, I'm spending most of my painting time on the skin. The rest of this miniature will be painted very quickly in a flurry of brush strokes. This is the normal way I like to paint miniatures. I enjoy focusing on one aspect of a model, spending more time to create something eye-catching. This allows me to push my skill set, experiment with new techniques, and hopefully produce something special that people want to look at. I almost always tackle this portion of the miniature first, while I'm fresh and my enthusiasm for the project is high. Then I tend to paint the rest of the model with very basic yet proven methods. I'll demonstrate this in next week's video for some no-stress stone, non-metallic metal, and leather. It's kind of funny that anytime I paint non-metallic metal, it tends to fall into the mindless portion of my paint ups. At some point, I'll have to dedicate some serious effort to non-metallic metal and see what I'm actually capable of producing. I think that'll be a lot of fun. The final touch I'm adding to the flesh is a little red glaze. I'm using crusted sour for this. It's kind of a dark, desaturated glaze that I feel works brilliantly as a skin glaze even when heavily thinned with water. I like to use this type of glaze around features such as elbows, knees, and of course the creature's facial features. And with the red glaze in place, this will wrap up painting the skin for the Cliffbreaker Cyclops for Massive Darkness. I'd like to thank my awesome channel members for supporting my work on this channel. You too can become a channel member for as little as $1.99 per month and receive perks such as early access to videos, extended versions of our painting tutorials, and even a tier that lets you choose which miniature I paint next. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of painters only painting one portion of a miniature in a single video.